Speaking of the heat of the moment, let's talk about the heat of the moment. So right now, as you've probably seen some of my previous videos, hey, sorry for my look. It's early. I'm still having my coffee and stuff. But yeah, I get up, I start reading, I start going through stuff, see what's going on. And yeah, so I guess, let me grab my phone too. That's where I got the article I woke up to. This is cool. So Electrek posted this article about how BYD is calling out the U.S. and Europe for being afraid of Chinese EVs. And if you can see what I got up here, I actually have a video that I watched the other day that talks about how BYD's assemblies, how their control arms and stuff are basically thinner than your thumb, and they're calling them chopstick chopstick axles. Basically, what's happening is BYD vehicles have a range of issues, right? And so, right now, as you know, the U.S. government put a 100% tariff on the on Chinese-made EVs. Europe is raising their tariffs left and right on these EVs. And I can't blame China for taking advantage of their position, right? That's basically what we taught them to do in setting them up as capitalists. But at the same time, most of the stuff I've found is good and bad, right? BYD makes an incredible car, has a lot of great features, amazing accoutrements in the interior and stuff to really, it's a nice car for so little. Well, you have to ask yourself, how do you get a nice car for so little? It's like I explain to people when they buy e-bikes. Sure, it's a really cheap e-bike, but you have to ask yourself, what parts, what components, what items did they skimp on in order to get that price down to a certain level? And sure, everyone will say, well, it's China, they have cheap labor, which isn't true anymore. So, and they're using very advanced manufacturing techniques, which cost a lot of money to set up and build. And we've already seen where a lot of the subsidies and basically just government handouts go. We do it the same. We do the same thing with companies. I will say we tend to make it a lot more difficult for companies to get those handouts. But I think not necessarily from a economic perspective, but from a public safety perspective, and the things that are being shown in the quick build methodology that's being adopted in these car manufacturers in China is there's a lot of things that are going wrong. Okay. Just this video I have pulled up right now.
Vehicle owner tragically lost control while attempting to drift his BYD west in a bustling district. The vehicle veered into the right-hand guardrail, and both rear wheels were dislodged and flung from the car. Some comments on social media have humorously described this incident as BYD's dark technology, with wheels detaching autonomously upon loss of control.
Now, you're about to see proof that whoever is at BYD responding to this stuff was in software development. And I'll explain why in just a sec. I'll explain why this is good.
Others speculated that the emergency wheel detachment might have acted as a makeshift brake, potentially preventing a worse outcome. They joked that this safety feature could only be activated by a reckless driver. Cases of wheels detaching while BYD vehicles are in motion are actually quite common. Let's review a few more cases.
What?
First off, we have the BYD Song Plus.
Okay, so this is why. Because in software development, because guess what BYD's response was? In software development, when you create something and it has a bug, right, that is what we call kind of a quasi bug. It has some kind of something to it that could be considered actually a feature, not a bug, right? So what do you do as the developer? You tell them that's a feature. That's not a bug. That's a feature. I put that in intentionally. So guess what BYD said?
From Shenyang, Liaoning. According to eyewitnesses, there was no collision, no accident, yet the rear wheels still fell off on its own. The second case involves another Song Plus, also alone at the intersection on the, of eyeing, and not even as thick as my thumb. Let's not even
Yeah,
talk about handling or comfort.
they're not
Even
made of
safety is not
aluminum
ensured here.
like many are. They're made of steel,
Look at the
which
2018
has a
BYD Chin's
much
rear suspension.
easier
Although it
break point.
also
It's
uses
not
a
as
3-ring
flexible and
structure,
forgiving.
these swing-on parts are all integrally stamped. They are made of sufficient materials and look safe enough. What's more infuriating is that the latest 2022 model of the BYD Chin still uses Blade batteries. The car is more expensive, so shouldn't the suspension use better materials?
Ooh, now he just brought up another interesting thing about BYD, and another reason why a lot of these countries are starting to put the hold on these. If you research this further, BYD has a really big problem with, and I'm going to use quotes, spontaneous combustion. There's, pictures of vehicles just catching fire randomly. No accident, no puncture, no nothing. Just, hey, it's on fire. There's also evidence of electric leak, right? Which it does happen to some degree, but they're talking enough to light up an LED right off the door jam, right off the door. So there are more reasons beyond just the economic ones and the manufacturing competitiveness involved here. There are aspects of it that actually involve your safety and involve the safety of others on the road. Because if you've ever seen a lithium battery catch fire, it is scary. That shit does not go out. All right. You have to bury it, you have to submerge it in water, completely isolating it from any oxygen source for who knows how long. They're just that way. So, excuse me. I think that there's a lot of political back and forth that's occurring, but from the research that I've been doing on China and from talking with people in China, what I'm finding is the narrative that exists of everything's hunky dory in China is not the case. The real narrative is the one where they're basically in a recession like we were in 2008, caused by, well, in their case, it's caused by overbuilding and overdoing their products. Basically, their surplus of product build. So we actually, a lot of people don't remember this, and I brought it up to my wife the other day that back before COVID, we actually bailed out the automakers here, and it was because they overbuilt. Right? They made too many cars. There was a glut of them on the road. They were selling at stupid cheap prices, zero financing, gave you 10 grand cash back, and we're starting to see that again, right? Um, so it's a thing where you look at and go, okay, the market can support so much, right? And then if you overbuild, the value of every item just drops. So no matter what you paid for it, because you now have 10,000 of them sitting in a fucking lot somewhere that no one wants to buy or no one can afford to buy, right? It's the value goes down. It's just how value works, right? It's like my kid, my son. He used to come to me and go, I got this thing, and when I look on eBay, right, they list it on eBay for $1,000. John, so it's worth $1,000. I go, okay. What do they pay for it? He goes, yeah, but it lists for $1,000. I go, that's what somebody wants, but the reality of value is what will someone pay for it, right? So he ends up, realizing this, and I think these car companies are realizing it as well. If you go and look, some of these trucks are like $100,000 for a big gas truck. It's like, really? Just Jeeps and four-wheel drives and stuff. Even cars, even just coupe cars are stupidly expensive and are just starting to come back down. I mean, there's 100 plus days of supply on vehicles. Okay. That tells me that we are making more than the demand, right? The problem with manufacturing, right? I'm going to go back to my video yesterday. The problem with manufacturing is in its current model in its current design, you have really big overhead costs just to produce one part for a whole vehicle. Okay, that means that anytime you can reduce that, be more agile and shift on the fly, it's going to be way better for you, right? Less downtime, less production downtime, quicker iteration times. So the big problem these companies get into, oh, I throw up cracks, is they've invested so much in this one design, in this one set of parts, in this one model, that in order to change it costs millions and tens of millions of dollars all the way down the line. So, and that's just for a change. That's not even talking about getting the stuff set up. So, when you look at stuff like this, you think, man, if this was built in the US, right, we would have more control over, at least as a country, with through regulation, over what parts are being used here, right? The FMVSS is very strict, uh, uh, federal mandated vehicle safety standards, and a lot of it probably wouldn't allow things like this, right? Any testing of these is going to show some serious issues, and the more I research it, the more I realize that even though it may look political, I think a lot of, and economically based, there's a big component here, right? That is safety oriented and keeping you safe on the road. Okay, don't lithium cars catch fire here too. Yeah, they do, but they don't just catch fire sitting in front of people's houses. They're usually plugged in, or they're usually in a wreck. So there's reasons. Don't get me started on that, because there's over 400 fatal gas fire or injury related gas fires uh, with ICE vehicles a day in our country. So it totally eclipses the number of those of lithium fires. More to the point, I think that even being made in Mexico, because of the designs here, it's not really going to matter as much. It's about parts, it's about safety, it's about design of the car. And just because you can pump out a ton of them doesn't mean you design them well, right? So if they start going through all these vehicles that are in hold in their pens, and they start seeing things like this, where hey, these arms are from yeah, no, they're not going to let these vehicles in, right? There's certain requirements that have to be met, and just seeing the failures that they're having in China en masse, and talking with people from China to validate it, that yeah, that's true. Yeah, no way. I wouldn't buy one. Forget that. And you can get them at a killer deal. But would you stick your kid in a car that the wheels are going to fall off of? No. Would you stick your kid in a car that the battery is going to ignite possibly when they're just sitting at a stoplight? No. That they might get locked in? No. That, you know what I mean? They might get electrical shock just trying to get in the car? No. You're not going to buy anyone that. You're not going to buy yourself that. So yeah, there's other reasons beyond, and I think that especially BYD needs to admit to it, because yeah, this is the kind of thing that would not just shut them out, but I mean, if it's broad enough, it could be a real issue for them, especially here in America and the other countries. I mean, China does stuff to protect its companies, right? BYD is a glory boy for China, and they're going to do things to keep stuff on the hush hush, keep people happy, pay things off. But when you start including other countries, it's not as easy, right? So that in the whole could become a really big issue for China if these vehicles are as bad, or I should say poorly designed in some areas, as indicated. So yeah, there's that one.
Look here, the suspension link is still not as thick as a finger. This
Yeah.
is what you call bad, really bad. This is why so many BYDs just have a minor tail bump, and their chopstick suspension breaks, and the rear wheels give way. BYD, look at the suspension. One link, two links, three links. How?
Further in on this video and some of the other ones too, they talk about a really bad accident one car was in. None of the airbags deployed. Not one. They're all still sealed, and the car was mangled. I mean, it was destroyed. The protective arm, right, part of the crash uh, infrastructure behind the panels was really thin, and it did take a good beating, but it just didn't look like it held up to anything. So there's a lot of concerns around safety. All right. So I'm sure BYD wants to call out the US and EU on economy reasons, but if they're going to do that, the least they could do is make sure their stuff is safe for people to drive. If you're going to import these things here and this stuff starts happening, those things will get pulled off the road, thrown away. You're going to get sued in class action. I mean, it's going to be ridiculous. So, yeah. So it's not just economics. It's not just politics. There's a lot more to it, and a big part of it is public safety. So, yeah, it's
How is
interesting.
this different from a toy
A
car?
toy car.
Is this material okay for a car? It's thinner than chopsticks. Let's open it up and look at the materials inside. This is a crash beam, so thin, it's not even as thick as our kitchen knife. The radiator support is made of plastic. Look at the fender here. This is a new car, see? It's already showing signs of rust. It'll never been disassembled. This is a so-called pride of domestic goods. The chopstick suspension isn't the only aspect
That
under
looks
fire.
scary.
Axle failures.
So yeah, there's a lot of stuff involved. But I think that there is ground, right? A lot of the advisors in this space seem to think that we should invite the Chinese into manufacture under certain conditions and learn and grow from that the same way they did with us. And it makes sense, I think, in a lot of ways. I think that there's aspects of this we're not as mature on, that they are much more mature on. But when it comes to other things, they could still benefit from knowledge and experience that we have, right? The thing that bothers me about this is it becomes such a us against them thing. And talking with Chinese people, we're all like, really, we're all the same. It's our governments that are different. And when it comes down to it, none of us like our governments anyway. At least the politicians. So there, we're like that. We're like that way too. So, yeah. So I don't know. I think a lot of that should be taken with a grain of salt when it comes to this whole BYD and the tariffs and stuff and the reaction of these countries. Um, a lot of it's positioning, poising for various reasons, but in the end, it comes down to, at least from what I can see, public safety, right? There's just a lot of issues. There's a lot of concern, and I think that if they can work those things out, sure, sell the cars here, right? If your stuff stops catching fire and you figured out why it catches fire and you fixed it, great. But to this point, yeah, it's just been a lot of big issues there. So that's it for me. I just want to get on that one for a minute or 10.